This is NTD Evening News. Live from our global headquarters in New York City, here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. A major win for Israel tonight. The Jewish state announces it killed the leader of Hamas, responsible for the October 7th terror attacks and other crimes. NTD's international correspondent, Arian Pazdar, has the story.
People in a city in northern Israel celebrating on Thursday night. This comes after a Gaza operation which targeted 3 terrorists. Among the dead, the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar.
Yahya Sinwar is the Osama bin Laden of his time.
Sinwar is the chief architect of the October 7th terror attacks on Israel. He was named leader of Hamas after Israel killed the previous leader, Ismail Haniyeh. The State Department commented on Sinwar's time with Hamas, saying he
was a brutal, vicious terrorist responsible for the death of American citizens, Israelis, and civilians from more than 30 countries across the world.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also commented on the death of the Hamas leader.
The perpetrator of the most terrible massacre in the history of our people since the Holocaust, the mass murderer who murdered thousands of Israelis and kidnapped hundreds of our citizens.
Netanyahu added that the fighting cannot stop. He said Israel won't rest until all remaining hostages are returned home. But the US sees this as the perfect chance to reach a ceasefire deal now.
Hamas is decimated and its leadership is eliminated. This moment gives us an opportunity to finally end the war in Gaza.
Sinwar was a massive obstacle to peace in the day after in Gaza. And now that that obstacle has been removed, President Biden looks forward to talking to Prime Minister Netanyahu about how we secure the return of the hostages, an end to the war.
Dozens of people demonstrated at the Israeli embassy in Jordan, a country that lies right next to Israel. They showed support for Hamas and Palestinians in Gaza.
Hamas will stay strong with or without Sinwar and will be tough on Israel. Hamas will not die.
There was no immediate comment from Hamas on the death of its leader. Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
And we'll be joined by 2 Middle East analysts to discuss what Sinwar's death means for the war in Gaza and broader conflicts in the Middle East. That's coming up in the second half of the show. An independent panel of former law enforcement officials lambasted the Secret Service for its handling of security at a Trump campaign rally over the summer. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas appointed them to review the agency's role in the security failures leading up to the assassination attempt of Trump. The panel says the Secret Service has become more complacent and static, even though risks have multiplied. They said those working the Pennsylvania rally this summer lacked experience and critical thinking. The panel attributed most of the concerns to the agency's do more with less culture. They believe a complete overhaul of leadership is needed. Acting Director Ronald Rowe was not named directly in the report's recommendation for leadership change. He was appointed after Director Kimberly Cheadle resigned in the wake of the assassination attempt. Turning now to the election, former President Trump is in New York, participating in a long-standing tradition in American politics that dates back to 1945, the Al Smith Charity Dinner. Vice President Kamala Harris is skipping the event and will send a video message instead. NTD's Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
Former President Donald Trump is in the state of New York this Thursday night to participate in the Al E. Smith Dinner, a fundraising event for Catholic charities that has been hosted by the Archbishop of New York since 1945 in honor of 4-time New York State Governor Al Smith. Former President Donald Trump will speak at the dinner, and comedian Jim Gaffigan will be the MC for the night. Vice President Kamala Harris declined to participate, breaking with tradition. Since 1960, when John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon were speakers, the dinner has been traditionally one of the last events both major presidential candidates share a stage before the election. In 2016, former President Donald Trump and Secretary Hillary Clinton exchanged humorous jabs.
You notice there is no teleprompter here tonight, which is probably smart. They're hard to keep up with, and I'm sure it's even harder when you're translating from the original Russian.
Hillary accidentally bumped into me And she very civilly said, "Pardon me." And I very politely replied, "Let me talk to you about that after I get into office."
And in 2012, then candidate Mitt Romney and President Barack Obama did the same.
It's nice to finally relax and to wear what Ann and I wear around the house.
Mitt is his middle name. I wish I could use my middle name.
The dinner has traditionally allowed for a more lighthearted exchange in between both presidential candidates right before the general election. Cardinal Dolan, the Archbishop of New York, expressed disappointment that Vice President Harris declined to participate, citing conflicts with her campaign schedule. A major presidential candidate has not declined to participate in 40 years. Instead, Vice President Harris will send a pre-recorded message. Vice President Kamala Harris's snub of the traditional dinner has drawn criticism from Catholic groups, and the Trump campaign has previewed that his supporters will not be disappointed by his performance. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Harris is campaigning in the battleground state of Wisconsin today, with stops in Milwaukee and La Crosse, highlighting key issues she hopes to change. A polling average from the Washington Post shows her holding a slight lead in the state. Here she is speaking just moments ago.
There was a time that generations of Americans could count on the American dream, but for far too many these days, it is just out of reach. So we will deal with the housing supply, and I will commit to creating a $25,000 down payment assistance so you can, for the first-time home buyers, just get your foot in the door. We will also lower costs on everything from healthcare to groceries, including taking on corporate price gouging, which I've done before and I will do again. One does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree the government should not be telling her what to do. And it is my pledge to you that when Congress passes a bill to restore reproductive freedom nationwide, as President of the United States, I will proudly sign it into law.
Harris also vowed to restore reproductive freedom, greater access to abortion, calling for a return to the protections of Roe v. Wade. Harris is set to arrive in Green Bay tonight before continuing her campaign in Grand Rapids, Michigan tomorrow. The rally comes a day after Harris sat down for an at times heated interview with Fox News. Take a look.
Just 3 weeks before Election Day, Democratic nominee Kamala Harris sitting down for a contentious interview with Fox News. The vice president sparring with anchor Bret Baier over border security for nearly half of the 27 minutes interview.
The first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the... Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please?
The interview hitting a climax over recent comments from Trump that his political rivals are the enemy within the U.S., though Fox did not play that portion of his comments in a clip during the Harris interview.
He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it.
Trump himself responding to the interview with a post on Truth Social, saying in part, "Congratulations to Bret Baier on a tough but very fair interview, one that clearly showed how totally incompetent Kamala is. For the good of our nation, her inferior cognitive ability must be tested at once."
In the interview, Harris also promised that her presidency would not be a continuation of Biden's presidency. Early voting has kicked off in North Carolina. Over 400 voting sites are open across the state, including in counties affected by Hurricane Helene. And now joining us at the Election Data Hub is NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, with 19 days left until the election, North Carolina has gone back and forth between Harris and Trump. Now, this is the lone swing state that Trump has won each of the last 2 years. Where do things stand now?
Thank you, Tiff. Yeah, with Trump winning the state each of the last 2 elections, we really thought this was more of a Trump lean, but Harris has really closed the gap here. Let's take a look at a recent poll. Now, this is an insider advantage poll taken in late September here. As you can see, Trump just a 0.2 of a point lead over Kamala Harris. Now, that is far slimmer than the margins he won the state by in 2016, nearly 4 points then over Hillary Clinton, and then again in 2020, just over a point here over Joe Biden. Now, of course, what could be driving this change? Let's take a look at some demographics. Let's start with the younger people vote. This is according to ages 18 to 39 in North Carolina. These numbers here are the Democratic nominee versus Donald Trump in the state. Now, as you can see here, Hillary Clinton won this age group by 13 points in 2016. 4 years later, Joe Biden took this age group by even more, 16 points. And now in 2024, according to this Insider Advantage poll, Kamala Harris is ahead in this age group by 21 points. Now, just this 5-point advantage right here between Biden and Harris, that 5-point swing equates to 75,000 votes. Now, if you keep in mind, Trump won the 2020 election by just more than 74,000 votes over Joe Biden. So a big difference there, that's that 5%. Now let's take a look at those ages 65 and over. Again, in North Carolina, again, this is how the Democratic nominees did versus Donald Trump. Now you see Trump here led Hillary Clinton by 23 points in this age group in 2016. Fast forward 4 years, Biden did a little bit better, trailing Trump by 19. But then look in 2024, Harris has made up that 19-point deficit and then some, a 4-point lead over Donald Trump in this age group of 65 and older. A big win for her there. How about the male vote here? This is good. Male voters again in North Carolina. Again, this is how the Democratic nominee did versus Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton trailed Trump by 18 points among men in 2016. 4 years later, though, Biden closed that gap to 9 points. Now in 2024, very impressive here, Kamala Harris has kept that 9-point disadvantage. And of course, this is a huge group. 45% of all voters in 2020 and 2016 were male voters here. So a very slight change makes a huge amount of difference. So really, Tiff, these small differences in demographics make huge differences in this state. I think this is what these numbers are showing us. Back to you at the desk now.
All right, Dave, as always, thanks for that breakdown. Now let's go to NTD's David Lamb, who's at a voting site in the Tar Heel State.
North Carolina, a battleground state, began its first day of early voting on Thursday. We spoke to some residents about why they came out to vote today and what they had to say.
I've always voted early when the option was available. I wanted to make sure that my vote was cast and counted. My business was damaged somewhat, access, and we still don't have power.
What brings me to early voting is the excitement. Just kind of want to get it out the way and make sure if there was anything that I needed to bring or come back.
I think they've done an amazing job getting it up and running and getting the early voting starting when it should have been. The people that are volunteers have done a wonderful job. I mean, it's people helping people. That's what you're supposed to do.
Now, Hurricane Helene hit the state in September, affecting 25 counties, according to the State Board of Elections. And to get voters and get their ballots out, they're allowing voters in the affected counties to submit their ballots in a different county, and this to get more voter participation.
I think there's a lot of reason for people to turn out, not just because of Helene, but some pretty heavily contested contests on our statewide ballot, not just the presidential, but also we'll have a new governor, a new attorney general, members of our legislature will change, and our congressional representation. So I think it's just a real testament that for the people in the affected counties, this gives them some sense of normalcy.
We've got through it and was blessed, and not too many people can say that right now. A lot of people have lost their entire life, pretty much, families, houses, businesses, loved ones. So I'm just grateful that our family is still together.
In Black Mountain, we have roughly 8,500 people. They're probably right at the neighborhood of maybe 5% of that, maybe 400 people that are actually displaced or had to move out or lost their homes.
For 71-year-old John Russell, he fears that his community-based theater might not get power anytime soon, as there's so many people in neighborhoods that are waiting to get help. But he is glad that his home has gotten power again. Now, this early voting period begins on October 17th and ends on November 2nd. Reporting in Asheville, North Carolina, David Lamb, NTD News.
Georgia, where early voting already kicked off earlier this week, will not be implementing a number of new rules connected to the November election. A judge has blocked 7 rules related to election certification, absentee ballots, and vote counting.
Illegal, unconstitutional, and void. That's what Judge Thomas Cox called the new rules passed by Georgia's election board. One of these rules would require ballots be hand-counted after the polls close on November 5th. Opponents of the rule said this could disrupt the voting process, but supporters argued it would only take a few extra minutes. The rule changes would have given county election board members the authority to investigate discrepancies in counting, for example, the number of voters in the precinct and the number of votes cast. They would also have allowed board members to examine all election-related documents before certifying the results. A number of rules related to absentee ballots were also on the list. The drop box rule would have required voters to give their signature and produce a photo ID when dropping in absentee ballots. And the surveillance rule would have required video surveillance at all such drop boxes. The poll watcher rule would have allowed poll watchers stationed in more areas, and the daily reporting rule would have required county officials to report absentee ballots every day. Many Georgia Republicans describe the new rules as necessary election security measures, but Democrats opposed them, saying they were designed to impede the certification of results. Ultimately, it was 2 Georgia Republicans and the conservative nonprofit Eternal Vigilance Action that challenged the rules in court. They argued the Georgia Election Board did not have the authority to make these changes.
In Alabama, a federal judge has blocked an effort to remove non-citizens from its voter rolls. The judge said yesterday that changing the voting system less than 90 days before an election is illegal. Alabama Northern District Judge Anna Manasco ruled that federal law has given states a hard deadline of 90 days for decades. She says Alabama Secretary of State Wes Allen blew the deadline and that he announced the removal of ineligible voters 84 days before the general election. She ordered Alabama to halt its efforts to remove such voters. Her order also requires Alabama to help counties restore the voting status of those removed. The Justice Department sued Alabama in September. It alleged the state violated the 90-day quiet period in the National Voter Registration Act. President Biden has landed in Germany. It's a trip he postponed last week due to Hurricane Milton. The White House says Biden won't meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky during the trip, but Ukraine is likely a focus of the visit. Our foreign correspondent Noah Schmidt has an update from Berlin.
We have been gratified by the coalition of more than 50 countries we have put together to support Ukraine.
President Joe Biden is in Berlin. He's expected to discuss support for Ukraine with European leaders. Officials say he's set to meet with the German, French, and British heads of state tomorrow. Those countries and the US make up the so-called European Quad. They are some of Ukraine's top arms suppliers.
Every country has to make its own decisions based on their capabilities, based on their budgets, about what they can do.
The trip comes a day after the White House unveiled another $425 million in military aid for Ukraine. But this might be a precarious moment for the war-torn nation. American support hangs in the balance as the US election approaches. And the Ukrainian president's victory plan isn't necessarily getting the international support he had wanted.
We hear the word talks from our allies much more often than the word justice. Ukraine is open to diplomacy, but to the fair one.
At the heart of the plan is Ukraine's desire to join NATO, but the alliance has yet to invite the country.
And we continue to work with them about other measures that aren't included in the plan that we believe would position Ukraine to win on the battlefield and ensure a just and lasting peace.
Reporting from Berlin, Germany, this is Noah Schmidt, NTD News.
Germany is taking action against China's wind energy dominance. It's announcing measures to cut down on its reliance. Here are the details.
Germany is fighting back against China's wind energy dominance. Minister for Economic Affairs Robert Habeck says, quote, "We have a strong wind industry in Germany and Europe. and that we must continue to improve the framework conditions so that this industry remains competitive. The plan includes government financial backing, cybersecurity requirements, and reducing dependency on China. China is by far the world's biggest producer of wind energy, with plans for substantial growth every year. Germany is in a distant third place behind the United States. Currently, over 90% of a key component, permanent magnets, come from China. These magnets are made from rare earth minerals. China has the world's largest rare earth mineral reserves, as well as the will to pollute the environment when mining them. In April, the European Commission started investigating whether Chinese firms are receiving unfair subsidies. Germany's solar industry has already been hurt by an influx of cheap Chinese panels. The country is more aware of China's trade practices.
A British migrant charity says the UK could grant asylum to 62,000 migrants. It follows a shift in policy to no longer ban immigrants from claiming asylum if they arrive illegally. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more for us from London.
A new report estimates that the UK will grant asylum to more than 62,000 migrants as the British government seeks to clear a backlog of claims. That's more than half of the nearly 120,000 claims inherited from the previous government, and comes as the government insists it is committed to ending the use of hotels to house asylum seekers. The migrant charity Refugee Council analysed official data on asylum grant rates in the year ending June 2024. It indicates more than 62,000 more people could be recognised as refugees in the UK, which includes small boat migrants who crossed to Britain illegally from France. The migrants were previously blocked from claiming asylum by a law that said those arriving illegally should be detained and deported to a safe third country, but the new Labour government lifted this requirement. The Refugee Council said there will be 59,000 fewer claims in the backlog at the start of next year compared to if no policy changes had been made. They say this will save the government between $200 and $312 million. This forecast was revealed amid claims Britain's Home Office was considering reopening asylum hotels used by the previous government. Currently, nearly 30,000 migrants are being housed in hotels at a cost to the taxpayer of $3.9 million per day. The Home Office did not confirm if they were going to use more or reopen old hotels. A spokesman said the new government has so far removed 3,000 people with no right to be in the UK and is driving down the costs of asylum accommodation. Turning to Europe, the EU is considering setting up deportation centres outside the Union, where it would send failed asylum seekers. It's drawing lessons from Italy's migrant deal with Albania. The European Commission President said the EU's migration policy can only be sustained if those with no right to stay are effectively returned. This marks a major shift in Europe's immigration debate. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
And joining us now to discuss is two Middle East affairs analysts. David Wormser is an expert with the Center for Security Policy, and Gerard Fility is an international lawyer specializing in international law. Good to see you both. Now, David, starting with you, how significant of a blow is this to Hamas, especially given that, a lot of their top leadership and military commanders were also recently killed?
Yeah, I think that last point you just made is critical. The fact that it follows up on various other targeted killings. You had Nasrallah, Hezbollah leader, killed. You had Yahya Sinwar just now killed. You had Ismail Haniyeh a few weeks ago killed. It really, there's a momentum now. I think what you're going to start seeing is the beginning of the unraveling of Hamas. This is no longer a situation of looking for a ceasefire. This is now a situation of the complete collapse that looms ahead of Hamas. And that's a total victory if the Israelis now pull it off and just stay the course until the end.
And Gerard, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is calling this the beginning of the day after Hamas. What do you see happening next here?
I think what we can expect now is that Hamas is starting to unravel. There's critical momentum on the side of Israel to finally decapitate Hamas, as it did with Yahya Sinwar, but also to eliminate a lot of the remaining leadership and make sure that Hamas no longer functions as an organization. The biggest thing now is to keep pressure and to keep military pressure on, not to enter a ceasefire that allows Hamas to reorganize, but rather to finish off any remaining leaders in order to assure that there is a transition the day after into a state of peace and freeing the civilian population of Gaza.
And David, given that, Yahya Sinwar was one of the masterminds behind October 7th and other crimes, what does his death specifically mean for Hamas? Can they recover from this?
Well, it all depends on ultimately the real source of the war, which is Iran. And we see now Hezbollah is reeling and beginning to also show signs, not of full collapse, but certainly of deep retreat. Hamas, I think, like the other guest said, is now unraveling, which really means that all these tentacles of the octopus are now done off, and it's exposed now quite glaringly as an Israeli-Iran war. And the Iranians now will have to pick up the ball, and this really determines who will win. If the Israelis persist all the way to the end and take this now to Tehran, there is no recovery ultimately for Hamas or Hezbollah as long as the Israelis continue to put pressure and hold territory. But if the Israelis now stop, if they go easy on Iran, if they call the wall off, then it's a temporary victory, and you will see a rehabilitation in the next 2 to 3, 4 years until the next round. So this is really no moment where the constant refrain of de-escalation and ceasefire is productive. This is a twilight struggle really between two powers in the region, only one of which will survive.
David, I want to go into this operation specifically. Reports are noting that Israeli troops found Sinwar by chance, that he wasn't the target of the attack that ultimately killed him. That is different from the attacks on, say, especially the Hezbollah leaders with the walkie-talkies, the pagers that we saw recently. How do you read that? Why was Sinwar above ground when Israeli forces thought he was in the tunnels with hostages?
That's another great question. I think that's the key, which is he was above ground. And he was above ground because Israel is fighting a war that reveals to the West what we had forgotten. Wars aren't won by glamorous operations. As useful as the beepers were, believe me, this was an amazing operation by the Israelis with the beepers and killing them, critical to winning the war. But at the end of the day, it's the grit of the dirty grit of the soldiers on the ground, putting pressure daily, just advancing, slogging through, and eventually coming across the enemy and eventually eliminating him. And all this would not have been possible through the strategies advocated by the United States along the way of stopping ceasefire and then targeted assassination using these glamour tactics. At the end of the day, wars are won through the grit of the soldiers on the ground.
And Gerard, speaking of the hostages now, does Sinwar's death open the way for new dialogue for a potential hostage release?
It certainly opens that possibility, and we saw that from Prime Minister Netanyahu today, who made an offer to the remaining Hamas fighters to essentially leave and live, to release the hostages and unconditionally lay down their weapons, which is probably the best opportunity for a resolution that we've seen since the start of this conflict. There is a unique opportunity now for the remaining forces in Hamas to release the hostages, show goodwill, and end this conflict. However, it's unlikely that they will do so given the past history that we have seen with Hamas. As has been pointed out, this ultimately stems from Iran. Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis in Yemen are merely vessels of the Iranian state, which since 1979 has been dedicated to the destruction of the state of Israel. So we may have a temporary reprieve, we may have a temporary victory, but this will go on so long as we don't address the big issue, which is Iran.
And on that note, President Biden saying in a statement today, quote, "This is a good day for Israel, for the United States, and for the world." What does this mean for the region more broadly, especially when it comes to Iran?
What this means more broadly is that now it's becoming crystal clear who the enemy is. We're looking at the dissolution of Hamas, but still we have the day after. There needs to be pacification in that region. We're still dealing with Hezbollah, which is Israel is making progress, but there's no illusion that's still going to be over quickly. There's still a lot of Hezbollah fighters that need to be eliminated. The U.S. last night sent B-2 stealth bombers to deal with some Houthi compounds in Yemen. These are all major achievements in the war against terrorism, but it doesn't address Iran. And what we will see now is Israel retaliating against the Iranian missile attacks. And now what we need to see is American leadership, whether it's in the form of more sanctions against Iran or helping to provide weapons and intelligence to decapitate Iranian leadership responsible for these terrorist organizations.
David, speaking of leadership, the U.S. election is just around the corner. With Sinwar's death here, do you see Americans changing their view on the, conflicts in the Middle East? Will they change how they vote? How do you view that?
I think Americans are tired of the Middle East to directly intervene, so we would appreciate allies that are strong and win so that we can actually rely on them and disengage a little bit and put our priorities elsewhere, maybe Asia, Europe, or so forth. So I think an Israeli victory is very much an American interest, and I think Americans see it that way. There's also, though, the negative side, which is I believe that they have witnessed now their own administration criticized Israel for killing all the terrorists that killed more Americans than Israelis. And constantly, every step had going forward in winning this war was met with criticism and a demand to pull back and a ceasefire. And I think what the West as a whole is learning that we have forgotten how to fight wars and win. We even took victory out of the lexicon of our military discourse. So I think the Israelis are essentially schooling the West, and I think a lot of Americans is how we think and have always fought traditionally. And therefore, we're reawakening our own sense of what our purpose is and what we have in front of us when we have to enter conflict, which we are, in fact, to some extent already entering globally.
And Gerard, how do you view this impact on the U.S. presidential election?
I think it does have an impact. We've seen over the last year the Biden-Harris administration pushing Israel to back off, to not continue its attacks and essentially enter a ceasefire, which would have left Sinwar and other leaders in place, meaning that terror attacks would have continued not just in Israel, but around the world. On the other hand, we've seen Donald Trump arguing to defend Israel and pledging to support its operations. So we do see a clear dichotomy between an administration that has been hesitant and reluctant to give its full support to Israel and a candidate who has been in the past very supportive of it. And Americans going to the voting booth on election day will see this difference, and they will take into account what America's role is to be in the region, whether we need to be involved as it would be under potentially a Democratic administration, or whether we trust and help our allies like Israel do what is in our best interests as well.
Gerard Filitti, David Wormser, thank you both so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
As we're counting down towards Election Day, both presidential candidates have been taking interviews from mainstream news outlets, late-night TV, and podcasts. Have voters been following their airtime? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall to hear from them.
So first of all, have you seen any of the interviews with either candidates?
Yeah, in today's age, you don't see full interviews. A lot of times you see clips.
I've watched them all. I'm interested in all the voting.
Stephen Colbert and Stern. I saw clips of Trump dancing the other night.
Well, I seen where he just did a town hall. I think it was the Hispanic Heritage Foundation or something like that.
Just the excerpts that's on the news. I haven't watched them, for any length of time.
And I've seen the interview of Trump also with Elon Musk and a few other people.
I've read about Kamala's interview with, what is his name, that Fox guy.
It's just some clips on the news or from social media, but I didn't watch it as a whole.
Who do you think has been handling it better?
I think Donald Trump's been handling better. Trump at least has an answer, and he comes up with an answer, and Harris a lot of times will circumvent the question and never give you a hard answer.
Well, I guess you'd have to say J.D. Vance, because he can handle all the press, and I don't know Trump, he just gets mad, and Kamala, she doesn't answer any questions.
See, Kamala is, if you look at it, she's more
She's got a better tone and better demeanor than Trump. But Trump's policies to many people are better.
I'm not really fond of either candidate. Trump calling himself the father of IVF and then the other day doing the YMCA dance was a little strange. Harris, if she would actually ever answer a question, would be the first time she would ever have answered a question in her life, I think.
I thought she spoke eloquently about what's actually going on.
Republicans are going to vote for Trump either way. Obama going out there telling black men they need to vote to support Kamala just because she's black. The whole women thing, I'm so sick of that.
The Bret Baier interview appeared to me to be having a lot of gotcha questions.
For me, I would say Trump is better at it. He knows how to deal with people, and I think people like him better than Kamala.
The Los Angeles Archdiocese has agreed to pay over $800 million to resolve sexual abuse claims brought by over 1,300 alleged victims in the Catholic Church, with some cases even dating back to the 1940s. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
The Archdiocese of Los Angeles reached an $880 million settlement on Wednesday with 1,353 victims of childhood sexual abuse. Public records reveal that over 300 priests who served in the LA Archdiocese have been accused of sexually abusing minors. The survivors came forward following the passage of California's Assembly Bill 218, which opened a 3-year window to revive civil claims for past sexual abuse involving minors, with some cases dating back to the 1940s. Los Angeles Archbishop Jose Gomez approved the settlement, which will be funded through their reserves, investments, bank financing, and contributions from religious orders and other parties. Gomez said in a statement, "I am so sorry for every one of these incidents from the bottom of my heart." He goes on to say, "My hope is that this settlement will provide some measure of healing for what these men and women have suffered." The Archdiocese of Los Angeles previously paid $740 million in settlements, raising the total payout to over $1.5 billion. Christina Corona, NTD News, Los Angeles.
Former One Direction singer Payne died due to multiple traumas and bleeding caused by a fall. The news comes from an Argentine prosecutor's office today, revealing the first official results of the star's autopsy, as fans around the world mourn his death.
This is the 911 call made from the Argentine hotel where British singer and former One Direction member Liam Payne was found dead. A hotel employee tells the operator that there's a guest intoxicated by drugs and alcohol. They say he's breaking the whole room, and that they are afraid he might do something that will put his life at risk. It was later that evening that police say Payne fell from the third-floor balcony of his hotel room. An Argentine prosecutor's office revealed his autopsy a day later on Thursday. It said he died due to multiple traumas and internal and external bleeding caused by a fall. In a statement, police said Payne's hotel room was in, quote, total disorder, with various broken objects and medications scattered. At an overnight vigil outside of the hotel, Romina Petrone shared a video of her daughter meeting Payne just 2 weeks prior.
She said to me, "Mom, I'm going to the hotel. I'm going to meet him." And well, she did it. Today, when I found out, I called her at work, and she couldn't believe it. She said, "You're lying."
The 31-year-old singer rose to fame with One Direction, one of the world's biggest selling boy bands. They got their start on Britain's X Factor in 2010. They broke up in 2016 to pursue solo careers. Details surrounding his death remained unclear, though Payne had spoken publicly about his struggles with mental health and using alcohol to cope with the pressures of fame. Residents from Payne's hometown of Wolverhampton say it's a sad day for the community.
He's a dad, he's a son, he's a brother, and he means a lot to people, and especially our community as well, and it's just really sad just to hear about it.
He leaves behind his son Bear, who he had with British TV personality Cheryl.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.